Thank you, Sam. And let me also welcome the folks to what we have titled Lawsuits and Liability Issues. And as that title would imply, we're going to talk about lawsuits that are occurring all over the United States in institutions that are not following correct safe deposit procedures. And as we go through these lawsuits, folks, and there's a bunch of them, and they total up into millions of dollars, we're going to tell you what these institutions did wrong, and hopefully with that information, you can review your procedures and make sure you're not doing the same thing incorrectly. But before we do that, let me emphasize what Sam mentioned. The handout material that was sent to you, that you have a link to, there's approximately 50 pages of material. And it's important that if you have multiple people listening at your location to this presentation, every person should have their own set of handouts. That's important because today's program is very interactive, and you will be asked to take notes as we progress through this entire 2-hour session. So now, if you made those copies, everyone has their own. Put your name on the top of it. Take possession of those handouts, and take those handouts back to work with you. And this will be your reference if you have questions that come up in the future about why we had to change policies or procedures or whatever. The second thing I'd like to mention, we mentioned we were going to have a couple of Q&A sessions, if time permits, and the people that have the most questions to ask are the people who work in this area the most frequently. So what I'd like to do is have each of you, if you have multiple people, select the person that's the most familiar with your current safe deposit procedures and have that individual sit directly in front of the computer keypad. And as they think of these questions, have them input those questions into that. They'll go right to Sam, and once we get to the Q&A sessions, he'll feed that information back to me. We'll try to address and answer as many of your questions and concerns as we can in the time permitted. The third thing I'd like to mention, in your handout, on page 2, let me expand a little bit about how I got involved in doing what I do as a living right now, talking about safe deposit. I have been doing this for 45 years. Got started doing it many, many years ago when I was a banker here in Houston, Texas. And like many of you, I got involved in the safe deposit area just like you did when I inherited that department. No training. They just walked up one day and said, Dave, that department is yours. Well, Dave didn't have a clue what they did in that department, but about that same time, there was a program introduced by the American Bankers Association. They piloted that program in my city on how to run a safe deposit area properly. It was a 6-week program, 1 night a week, 3 hours a night, and I signed up for it. Went to that program, and I got frightened because I found out in that program lots of information that told me we were doing everything in our department incorrectly and setting ourselves up on a daily basis to be sued. And not a person in my bank knew that. So what I'm going to be sharing with you are a lot of the things I learned 45 years ago and all the things that I'm hearing and seeing being done incorrectly around the United States, and these things are creating lawsuits. And that's why this program was developed. I'm going to give you the lawsuits. I'm going to tell you how much they lost or what possibly they could lose. And the most important thing is what procedures caused that. So now let's turn to page 3 in your handout. And let me give you an overview of what the next 2 hours are going to consist of. First of all, I have approximately 30 different lawsuits that have happened recently or within the last 3 or 4 years in institutions that weren't following good procedures. And number 2, we're going to talk about what procedures were missing. And these are the things I really would like all of you to take notes on, because these are the things I want you to go back, look at your own internal procedures, and see if you think this could be your institution I'm talking about. And these are the things you can possibly make some improvements, like I did 45 years ago when I came back after each one of those sessions. Then we're going to talk about how some of these people are getting into boxes. And I'm going to show you some locksmith tools that can open your safe deposit boxes in a matter of seconds without a key. And unfortunately, these are tools that you can buy on eBay. You can buy them through a catalog. You can buy them. Anybody can buy them, almost. Around the United States are being made available by different organizations, and these tools are frightening, as you will see when we get into that section. Then we're going to talk about the biggest confusion that exists nationwide. Your box renters think that you insure what they put in their safe deposit box. And if you don't think that's true, do a survey of your own box renters and ask the question, are your safe deposit box contents insured? And I will almost guarantee you that about 30 to 40 to 50% of your box renters are going to say yes, they are, either by FDIC, NCUA, or your financial institution. And we're going to tell you why that confusion exists and how you can prevent that confusion from being ongoing with these consumers. We're also going to talk in that section about what type of insurance you need to make sure you have an adequate amount of to protect you in case you're involved in one of these litigations that you're going to hear about today. And there's a certain amount I'm suggesting you carry, there's a certain type I'm suggesting you carry, and there's ways of answering questions when consumers ask, what kind of insurance do you have to protect us? Then we're going to get involved in contracts and how a contract can be used against you or for you in a courtroom during any of these courtroom litigations, and the resolutions that you need to make sure you have in place to protect you and use to set up these contracts properly. We're going to talk about scratch-outs and mark-throughs and incorrect information and what should be in contracts. All of this information will be in that section. Then we're going to talk about some institutions that have gotten sued because they accepted power of attorney forms to allow somebody who is not a signer on the box to have access to the box. And it turned out later that power of attorney was no good, or that power of attorney had been revoked. And we're also going to talk about the confusion that exists between what a power of attorney is and what a deputy or agent is on a safe deposit rental agreement. And we'll try to define the differences there, too. Then we're going to go right into a section called court orders. And then in this section, we're going to talk about search and seizures that can be performed by the DEA, U.S. Customs, Sheriff's Department. We're going to talk about IRS levies that will impact your safe deposit area. We're going to talk about garnishments and divorce decrees and other types of court documents that could be served or delivered to your institution that you need to know how to handle those things to protect your institution against litigation in the future. And after we get through doing all that, we're going to find out how ready you are for any of this litigation or liability or lawsuits or whatever, because I'm going to give you a liability and a lawsuit test. And it's an easy test, folks. There's only 10 questions on it. And if you can't answer those 10 questions in a positive manner, you're not ready to be sued. Your procedures are not ready to be tested. And we'll do that right at the end of the program. And as we said earlier, we do have a couple of Q&A sessions. We're going to go into those about midway into the program. We'll have one at the end. We'll welcome your questions, and we'll try to address and answer as many of those as we can. So as you can see, we have a pretty full 2 hours, folks. So to get started, as I promised, we're going to talk about lawsuits that are happening nationwide in financial institutions that rent safe deposit boxes. And let me stop right here. You may have 10 boxes rented. You may have 10,000 boxes rented. Both of you have the same liability because neither of you know what those people have in their safe deposit boxes. And when those people come in and say something is missing out of my box, you have the same exposure whether you have 10 boxes or 10,000 because you're going to have to defend against those claims with good internal operating procedures. So to start this off, if you look at the screen, we've got several lawsuits that we're going to be covering in detail. I'm going to give you as much detail as I know about each one of these things, but more importantly, I'm going to tell you what procedures were being done incorrectly that caused these institutions to write big, big checks to get out of these lawsuits. And the first one we're going to talk about, the institution was sued for $4 million, and this lawsuit happened because this institution had box numbers stamped on all of their renters' safe deposit keys. Please write that down. Box numbers stamped on safe deposit keys cost this institution $4 million. And to emphasize this, I want you to put a star right beside that little A right in front of the incorrect procedure if you now have box numbers stamped on your keys. And if that star is there, listen carefully to this story because this could happen to you. If you have numbers stamped on your keys, listen carefully. This story starts early one morning when a lady walked into the safe deposit area and asked to go in her jointly rented box that she and her husband had rented in that vault. He attended, got her signature, verified it against the contract, everything.